Okay, we're going to go and start looking at comparing fractions. So first we need to talk about how the denominator controls the fraction. So if I split a piece of pizza evenly with 2 people, then me and that one other person will get half of a pizza. If we split it evenly with 3 people, then we'll each get a third of the pizza. With 4 people, we'd each would get a fourth of the pizza. All right, if it was 8 people, we'd get 1/8 of the pizza. So it's not hard to see that this slice that you get becomes smaller and smaller because I'm cutting the same whole into smaller pieces because it's got to be more pieces, but it's the size that it started with was the same. So that makes the sense to say that the larger the denominator, the smaller the piece that the piece that it is, and if the numerator is kept fixed, so if your numerator stays the same, then the larger the denominator, the smaller the fraction. So for example, if A over B is less than A over C, whenever B is greater than C, some algebra thrown in there at you. All right, so let's look at some examples. So we've got 2 over 7 or 2 over 5. Which one is larger? So remember this, the larger the denominator, the smaller the pieces. So I've got 7 is my denominator. So remember the larger the number means the pieces are smaller. So I'm talking about the same amount of pieces that would make 2/5 be the larger one. All right, try this one. So go ahead and write it on your paper and try and answer this one. All right, so we've got 8/23 or 8/25. So remember the larger the denominator, the smaller the pieces. So the larger denominator would actually be the smaller fraction because the numerators are staying the same. They kept fixed. So the answer would be 8/23. Good job. All right, here's another one. So remember, the numerator is kept constant. So the larger the denominator, the smaller the pieces. The larger the denominator, the smaller the pieces. So therefore, 41 over 135 is your larger fraction. All right, so now look at it. Let's look at it if we talk about the numerator affecting the fraction. So I got 1/6, 3/16. Oh, I'm sorry, I said 1/6. 1/16, 3/16, 5/16. So you see what's going on here? Now the denominator is staying consistent, and the numerator is changing. So when the numerator gets larger, then we have more pieces. And if the denominator is kept fixed, if the denominator stays the same, then the larger the numerator, the larger the fraction. All right, so what about if we're going to compare fractions with different numerators and different denominators? So in this case, it'd be pretty difficult to tell just from the number of which fraction is bigger. So we have 3/8, here's a good one to kind of look at, and 5/12. So this one has less pieces, but each piece is larger than those on the right. This one has more pieces, but each piece is smaller than those on the left. So let's look at them. So one way to answer this question is to change the appearance of the fraction so that the denominators are the same, and then we can just compare our numerators. So in this case, the pieces that are smaller are the same size. The larger numerator makes a bigger fraction. So the straightforward way to do it is to just find a common denominator. So to multiply the two denominators together to find this one. Or you could find the least common denominator. Either way works out. The easiest way would be just to multiply your two denominators together. So if I do 8 times 12, and so remember, whatever you do to the bottom, you got to do the top. So 3 times 12, so it makes it 36 over 96. Then you got 5/12, which would be same thing, multiply each top and the bottom times 8, which will also give you 96. Because you know that 12 and 8 will have a common multiple of 96 because 12 times 8 is 96, where 8 times 12 is also 96. Some of you might have recognized this, that you could have also just taken 3/8 to making it over 24, which would be times 3 times 8 to get 24, so it would be 3 times 3 on top, so it would be 9/24. And then 5/12 could also go to 24, which would be 10/24. The same thing, the fractions are, remember those are equivalent fractions, so it's the same regardless. So we've got 3/8, which equals 36 over 96 when you multiply the numerator and the denominator by 12. And then 5/12, which is 40 over 96 when you multiply the numerator and the denominator by 8. So now you can just compare the top two numbers because your denominators are the same. So therefore, when we look at this and we've got 36 is less than 40. So the greater fraction would actually be 5/12. Okay, so we're done. So go ahead and make sure tomorrow that you bring in a summary of how you compare fractions, and go ahead and bring in an example of this as well, of how you can compare fractions. So I want you to go ahead and write me a summary. Remember talking about how we talked about how you can compare fractions if the denominator was the same. So bring in a sentence explaining that, and how to compare fractions if the numerator is the same. Bring a sentence 1 for that. And then how to compare fractions if the denominator and the numerator are different, finding common denominator. You're doing it to find common denominator. So go ahead and bring those in. And then any questions that you might have that we can look at to go over. All right, see y'all tomorrow.